I mean, tennis and my journey. I mean, I started playing pretty late, actually. 2000, when I was 8 years old. It was in 1993, relatively late. But I think my college tennis journey. That's right, kind of when the whole thing really changed. I think there's a lot of different paths to a person's career, at least tennis career. And part one was growing up and kind of falling in love with the game. Part two was actually getting reasonably decent at it. And then the next part for me was the most important, which was when you made that step to decide to go to college, and then the journey that kind of happens from then on. So I went to the University of Virginia from 2004 to 2008. Graduated in '08 with a degree in sociology. Um, post college, I did go out and give it a shot in the pros. I played for about eight years or so. And honestly, my transformation in tennis began around 2004, which is when I actually went to college. Because my whole life up until that point, I was in India. The truth of the matter is that there were limitations to how far I could go if I was here. And more importantly, I think I realized at that age, I'd gone to a tournament, then I won the futures, and I realized that I made $1,200 from it, and that wasn't going to cut it for that wasn't going to cut it if I wanted to continue playing on tour. So the first thing I think is I realized that I wasn't going to be able to afford playing professional tennis at the young age of 18 and 19. And even if I was able to afford it, there was a very good chance that I wasn't ready at the time. So that once you kind of understand those things, then the decision of college becomes a lot simpler. And then you narrow it down to seeing, what kind of college you want to go to, what kind of career you want to potentially opt for, and the kind of options you want to give yourself in 3 or 4 years. So, that happened around 2003, 2004 is when I realized that I needed to go to college. I was honestly very lucky to get into UVA in many ways. Um, but yeah, that's when the whole transformation really began. And, you know, here I am. I got extremely lucky that I got into UVA, to be honest. So I wasn't the best junior, and this should give a little bit of perspective to some kids that are out there now. In 2004, when I was being recruited, I was the number one. No, 2003, I was the number one junior in India, but my best world ranking was around 40. So that means I got into the slams, but I didn't really progress. I didn't do so well. So at the international stage, I was a very average junior. Um, by the Indian standards, I was the best junior. Um, but it wasn't quite good enough to get into some of the top US colleges. So the funny story for me is, at that time I wrote to pretty much every single college that I could in the top 25, and didn't write and didn't hear back from anyone. And then I wrote to UVA, who was 26 at the time, and they got back to me, and then the coach flew down, met me, my family, and that's kind of how that journey really began. But I in terms of my academics, I was always okay. Like, I wasn't a straight A student, but I also realized that I mean, my tennis was probably going to be the main factor in getting me into a college or getting me a scholarship. So academically, I was always fine. So I had probably in the 10th, somewhere around the 80s, somewhere, so an okay student. But I mean, I definitely needed a scholarship. I definitely needed financial aid. There was no way my parents were going to be able to afford $35,000 for 4 straight years. At the time, it was 35. UVA right now, 16 years later, 17 years later, is I think 60,000, which is, I mean, an absolutely crazy amount to think about, that some parents have to afford anywhere between $200 and $250,000 a year for a kid's 4-year education. So a scholarship was something that was an absolute requirement for me. So I made that very clear with the coaches right away. So for me, then at that point, it became, how much was I willing to pay to get the best experience that was available to me at the time? Because while UVA wanted me, they did not offer me a full scholarship. Um, and a few other schools offered me full scholarships, but they were not the right school for me. So that's kind of where I was, and I had about 3 or 4 schools, and UVA actually gave me the least amount of money, but it was very clear to me that they were the right people. I looked at their track record, I looked at the players that were there, their track record, and to see what kind of guys were there, what kind of program they were developing. The reason I went in obviously was because I wanted to, or at the time, my dream was to pursue professional tennis after college, but it was like way too early for me to understand. Guidance is the most important thing. You need to have people who you can trust, and you need to have people who know exactly what they're talking about. Luckily for me, there was a couple players. Harsh Mankad was a very nice, advisor. Ajay Ramaswamy, uh, funny enough, Vishal Uppal, who actually didn't play college tennis, and his coach helped me out a lot as well. Because the truth is, when you're from India, when you're a young junior from India, you're not going to know a whole lot about college tennis because people don't talk about it enough over here. It's almost got a stigma against it, which I find very strange at this point, because if you look at the number of great players that India has produced over the last 10 years, I'd say a majority of them have gone to college, whether you to talk about myself or Sanam Singh, Sakit Maineni, Jeevan Niranjarian. There's a lot of very good tennis players from India who have made a lot of success, and not just from India. I mean, tennis is a global sport, and you look at the kind of guys that have played college tennis, John Isner, Steve Johnson, just to name a couple, Kevin Anderson. So you see that it is possible to, make that jump from playing college tennis to being a successful pro. But the misconception in India is that if you go to college tennis, you'll miss out on the pros, which is, I mean, nothing further than the truth, because practically, if you look at it, most kids will only come anywhere close to their peak around 25 or 26. So then the question happens, what happens between the years of 18 and 22? Because those are the key years in development of a child. And generally on the futures tour, you don't get that quality in training. You don't get that kind of time to actually improve on your game and work on yourself and actually mature in the ways that will get you ready or even close to ready for professional tennis, which is why college tennis is such a good option, because it gives kids the option to still be kids, not feel the financial burdens that early on, while still getting an education and providing themselves, opportunities for personal growth as well, and maybe further their careers in tennis or anything else that interests them. I was looking to be in the East Coast. I did not want to play a whole lot of indoor tennis because I'd never played it in my life. So I wanted a place where I would have some indoor tennis, but not a whole lot. I wanted a place that was, a good academic institution. So the University of Virginia was a perfect choice. They were not the greatest. They didn't have the greatest history of tennis at the time. So that meant that I could have I could go to that place, and if I was good enough, I would have the opportunity to rise up the ranks. And I was also going into a team that already was established as a proper team and a really good conference. So the stars honestly just aligned, and I got really lucky. That's how I look at it. And obviously the work and all of that stuff also. Sporting facilities in America at the college level are absolutely outstanding. Most of the top schools have indoor and outdoor facilities available to practice on pretty much 24/7, believe it or not, right? Which for me at the time was just, I mean, it was a dream come true. I was coming from a place where if I needed to go and practice, I needed to talk to 4 people. One guy would open the gate, the other guy wouldn't have the key to the shed, and I would need to get practice balls, and then the court would be too bad and it would bounce over, my balls are gone. So I was coming from an environment like this where it's impossible to get ice in India after a practice, right? I think everybody in India watching this will be able to, I guess, feel the same thing. And I went from this to there's 13 outdoor courts. There's I think 10 or 12 indoor courts. There's trainers all the time. There's a gym open 24/7. There's probably 4 or 5 gyms. There's a track. I mean, everything is basically catered for you to have success if you're ready to put in the work. right? So when you put a motivated person into an environment like that, generally a lot of good things can happen. That was, I mean, honestly, being a part of a team environment was the nicest thing about college tennis, at least personally for me, because I'd always grown up in an academy, so you felt like it was nice. Tennis is an individual sport. It's hard. It's as I'm sure everybody who's played it understands the brutality that players go through when they win and lose, the emotions. It's really tough. And so the nicest thing for me was to actually get into an environment and have 13, 15 guys that you had fun with, but also felt like they cared about you. They were invested in your growth and in the opportunity that you had, and everybody was fighting towards one goal, which is to win the national championship at the time, right? And the only way to get there was if everybody improved collectively as a group. So again, at 19, 20, to think and talk about these kind of things, you have to be, I always believe that in order to try and get the best out of yourself, you need to put yourself in the best situations as often as possible. And to put yourself around a competitive, healthy environment at that age is the most important thing, because that's what players miss out on. Imagine when you're 19 or 20 years old and you've decided to turn pro, and you're grinding on the Futures Tour, and you have no one to practice with, or you get injured, and now you have a month off. Like, these are very, very, very realistic situations that unfortunately people have to go through. But when you're in college, you have an entire team that kind of takes you out of these situations. It's the team's responsibility to make sure that you get better when you're sick. It's the team's responsibility to make sure that you are on the court as soon as you can be to compete and get ready for the university. So this kind of infrastructure is just something that it's very hard to come by when you're younger, and it's very hard to comprehend these problems and see them coming. But unfortunately, it's a reality of trying to be a professional athlete. I mean, even now looking back, it's pretty special. But I more than thinking of those trophies and titles and stuff, I just think about the things that took place in order for that process to actually happen. So, for example, my second year was my toughest year in college, tennis wise. I was struggling. I was going through ups and downs. I think statistically it was the worst season that I had. And so, while I was in the dumps, as they would say, is when I looked at my coach and I said, I've got to clean up my act, got to work extra hard, do things right, and then maybe we can pull it around for the team. Because I was at that time where I was I was between 1 and 2 with another guy on the team, and there was no problems there. But I mean, it was just I was just getting used to being at that number one spot, and so obviously I was playing the best players on the other teams, and maybe that's the reason I was taking losses, because I was a little inexperienced at that time. But basically from that position is where I came out, and then by the time the NCAA tournament came around, I felt really good about my game, and really good about the kind of new work ethic I'd started finding towards the end of that second year. So the fact that I got success there and lost, I mean, I think it just kind of gave me a little bit of a little confidence, because up until that point, I definitely doubted, could I really make it in professional tennis? Could I really, is this a viable option for me? Because obviously, this is, I'm sure a lot of people can associate it with this, but early on in your life, it's not easy to dismiss haters, right? Like, there's always people going to say that you're not going to be good enough, or in my case, I wasn't hitting the ball big enough, or I didn't have the game to be on the tour, all of that stuff. I've heard it all, right? And so there was obviously a little bit of doubt. But once I made that first final, I was like, man, maybe those guys don't know what they're talking about, and maybe I have a chance to make it, because look at the players that have done this in the past. And a lot of those guys had really gone on to have really, really good professional careers. So, that really gave me a little bit of an edge. And by the time I moved on to my third and fourth year, I took on a new leadership role on our team, and so things got a lot more professional from that point. The focus was a lot more singular. It was just about winning an NCAA, and that meant by doing that, in order to win, we had to get the process right. So, it started a completely new process and a new culture in the University of Virginia. And from that point on, we've had a really, really solid history, and I'm really proud to have been a part of that changing in the guard almost, because again, once I had a little bit of success after that third year by winning NCAAs, for me, I was just happy that I won, obviously, but it was really, really motivating to go out and see Kevin Anderson and John Isner. I beat Kevin in the semis, which I thought was like one of my best matches, and obviously John in the finals. And they were both top 100 in no time. And they were both, winning against world-class players, very, very quickly after college. So, that gave me a little bit of perspective saying, now this is possible. And I think just putting yourself in that environment, I mean, I was really lucky to have that, because there's no way other players in India who decided to bypass college would have had these experiences that will ultimately make you be any decent at tour on the tour level. When you're looking out to be a professional athlete, or you're trying to find out how good of an athlete you can be, it's very, very important to surround yourself with like-minded people. And in the college environment, it's the duty of the college athletics program and the coaches and the athletes involved to try and get the best out of themselves. So the most important thing for me was to just be in that environment. And once I was in that environment, the rest of the things just happened. I mean, for me, it was huge, mainly because, again, not to sound pessimistic about my times here, but I always felt like there was two problems that I had faced with a lot of coaches in India. Until you make it, you're really not good enough, and everything you do is crap, right? So, like, for example, until you make it, until you win a nationals, they're like, yeah, you're never going to win a nationals with this kind of volley or with this kind of forehand or this kind of technique. And once you've made it, you've done no wrong, right? They're like, oh, this guy's won it. Now that he's won it, they've put you up on a pedestal, and every time you practice, there's kids watching you. And I think that like both of these things are super unhealthy, right? Because on one hand, the kid is always doubting his own abilities, and on the other hand, the person who's done well is never questioned on how they need to also go out and continue the process of improvement, right? So for me, the first thing that changed was my college coaches looked at my personality and they said, we need to find a game that suits your personality and your strengths and weaknesses. So when I was in times, my coaches were like, you need to go to the net more, your volleys are not good enough, your slices crap and all of that stuff. And suddenly I was in an environment where my coaches were like, wow, you're really quick. You have a very good ability to focus and read the game. And these are your strengths and these are your weaknesses. So how do we make this work for you and make it difficult for your opponents? So I felt like the first thing that happened is we started tackling problems in much more objective ways that was going to be beneficial for growth. So even failures were looked at in very different ways. Success was looked at very different ways as well. After success, we would never come back and think that our work is done. It was always what's next. We need to keep going because there are many places we need to improve at. So I felt once again, it's just about being in the right culture. So luckily for me, the coaches and the players that were around at that time, all of us wanted the same thing, which is to find out how good of a tennis player all of us could actually be. So the fact that I was surrounded by, Sanam Singh, Tret Huey, Dominic Inglot, Michael Shabazz, Ted Angelinos, all of these guys are guys who've played slams or won multiple futures, but we pushed each other to a point where, it actually got a little ugly, but that was what was required at that age. And then the coaching staff also believing in the same philosophy of pushing yourself to the limit very often. So just having the right mindset, having the right belief comes from being in the right environment. And I think the coaches are the ones who provided that. When you're trying to pinpoint what exactly was the difference in your training habits here versus when you moved abroad, and for in my case specifically when you moved to college tennis, right? It was exactly these two things, and so the way I also try to approach things now is, what is the culture that we're trying to set up in a place, and what's the structure that we're going to approach the problems with. And I feel like with that approach, it's always helped me. That's when you think about the small things in a, that an athlete goes through, right? So let's think about a situation where three of us are in a race, and we're doing suicides, and coach says go run up and back and whatever. The first one doesn't have to do it again. It's really important that all of us give our best efforts, right? So that's what culture means. When you're in a team of 15 people, it's not okay to not give it your best effort. The only acceptable thing is to give it your best effort. Failure is okay as long as you're learning from it, and as long as you're continuing uh, towards finding improvement. Failure is relative, and success is also relative. Just because you've won a match does not mean you're successful. Because you've lost a match, it does not mean you're a failure. So I think people need to first understand what it is that they're going after in order to find out what is success for them, rather than just pointing out at matches and little things like that, because you have to go deeper than that in order to really try and find the things that will make you improve. No, I do not think so. I think for the rare top 0.01% that are good enough to go pro, I think they would be better in a professional environment, right? So let's look at the Alexander Zverevs and the Dominic Themes and the Rogers and the Rafas and the Novaks and the Murrays and the Morfields and all the great women as well, the Haleps and Coco Gauff. These players are special players, and that they're special players because at a very early age there are very clear signs that they belong at the top of the game at the international level. Very, very, very early ages, right? Grigor Dimitrov. I mean, honestly, the list goes on. Now, these people also, one is they've proved at a very young age that they belong. Two, they also have all of the resources backing them, so that if they fail, if they get injured, the hurdles they meet, they will be taken care of. Now, these two things are very, very rare to find. A lot of times, the biggest argument is when people say that they have enough money that they don't need to go to college. Well, there's a lot of things that money can't buy you. There's a lot of experiences that money can't buy you. There's a lot of, just a lot that a 4-year college degree can offer you that money cannot. And I think once people really start seeing that, then and actually feeling that, then they'll really understand what it takes. But I mean, up until this point, I think it's pretty clear that most Indian tennis players should go to college. Most Indian, I think Yuki Bhamri was like a rare example of someone who could have skipped, again, a clear sign, because he was the number one junior in the world and won the Australian Open, right? And even Yuki was arguable, and Yuki and I have the same conversation, but I think he made the right decision. But most of the other players, I feel like, are not ready. But if you fall in the category of the 99.99% of players that are not ready to be in the top 100 in the world right away, then college is the place for you. Honestly, in some ways it was pretty hard, and in some ways I was very fortunate. But the transition from college to pros, for me, again, it worked out. I was very fortunate that it worked out the way it did. I think a lot of players find it hard with finances, and I was lucky enough to secure a sponsor right out of college because of my results. Um, and that took away a lot of the financial burden. So it allowed me to just kind of continue playing and staying in the process of improvement. You know, um, Otherwise, I would say that transition can be really hard, mainly because like a month or two ago, I was at a futures event in Tunisia. And you see so many of these really good players ranked 300, 400, 500, or even below that, trying to go out there and play. And, again, the level at a futures for winning a futures, these guys are very good tennis players, you know. But it's incredibly hard. The margins are small, and more importantly, it's very hard, even at that level, to find the right guidance for improvement and to find the right motivation for improvement, right? So again, I think the important thing for me, lucky enough, I got into the ranking where I was about 250 fairly quick. And what that allowed me to do was to play a schedule where I could play all of the Grand Slams, at least the Grand Slam qualifyings, and it allowed me to get into a lot of the challenger events. So I kind of bypassed that entire futures and the qualifying of challengers kind of level, so that I was immediately into the events and I was immediately making points. But again, all, all of that stuff only happened because I was improving my game, and I was improving my fitness. I was improving, the little things, nuances in the game that would actually make me a better tennis player. So, but otherwise, I think the transition can be really hard. One of the hardest things I think about being a pro tennis player, let's say you're in the qualies of a challenger, you go and lose Saturday, you got to wait an entire week till you play another match, and so much can happen in that 1 week, you know. Including expenses, injuries, feeling down on yourself because you've lost, feeling the pressure of finances or traveling, or where you're going to stay, or what you're eating, and how you're going to train, who's going to train you, can you afford to be trained, can you afford to be injured? There's so many things that go in through a player's mind, and I was just lucky that I was in a position where I could handle all of that stuff. Overall college experience would be a 12 out of 10. I've made, the best friends of my life um, in the 4 years at Virginia that I'm still incredibly close with, and no amount of tennis matches will ever, come to question what I gained with those 4 years. So yeah, I think all in all, I'm just super grateful that I got all of these experiences, and I can only hope that other budding tennis players from India, uh, look to get similar experiences like this, so they can really make the best out of their life through tennis. So I think that would be the nicest thing. I hope that my story can be an example to a lot of youngsters out there that are trying to achieve similar things through their love for the game of tennis. And I actually believe that it's an incredible opportunity if you play tennis, and you have an amazing opportunity to have an experience of a lifetime while attaining all your goals, taking away the financial burdens from your family and yourself, and putting yourself in an incredible opportunity for growth. It's an absolute no-brainer. So I can only hope that that kids make the right decision.